Do you think that had he dropped out, let's just say at the beginning of the year, there had been a primary, would that have, do you think, significantly altered the political landscape?
Yes, I do. And I think it's two reasons. One, the best man or woman would have emerged. Two, had it not been Harris, and I don't think it would have been, the biggest albatross around her neck, personified by that View interview, was she had no way to differentiate herself from Joe Biden.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
And so Trump was able to say, Joe Biden, inflation, the border, overseas is a mess, crime and safety, college campuses. If you don't like that, vote for me. And by and large, you liked my first term.
All right, guys, good Tuesday to you. Tomorrow, we've got a great show breaking down all things legal with my buddy Josh Hammer. I love my conversations with him. But today, a big treat for you. Dan Turrentine, who I do the morning meeting with, is going to give us an analysis and a state of the Democratic Party. Who's up, who's down, who's got a shot at 2028, what their vulnerabilities are. So I'm excited for this because we're going to take a deep dive into who they are. Are they ready to take on Trump? What's the most effective argument? Who actually has juice, staying power? What lane will they run in? Dan Turrentine, he's done it all over the last several years. I love our morning conversations, but now we get to break down everything. So before I bring in Dan, I want to talk about a couple of our great sponsors and then have this conversation. If you're a longtime listener of the show, then you know my buddy Leo Grillo. Leo is the founder of Delta Rescue. It all started with one dog that he rescued, a Doberman he named Delta, that stood for dedication and everlasting love to animals. And that began the journey that Delta Rescue became. It is the world's largest no-kill sanctuary, not a shelter, a sanctuary. They help abused, neglected, malnutrition dogs get the help, the care, the feed, the veterinarian services that they all can be taken care of. And it doesn't matter. This is a place that they live out the rest of their lives, not a shelter where they're looking for a new home. Nope, Leo takes care of everybody. But the thing about Leo Grillo and Delta Rescue is that there's no big government grants coming their way. All of Delta Rescue is funded through the personal donations of people like me and you. I made a personal donation because I'm so impressed with what Delta Rescue does. Go to deltarescue.org and see if you can make a donation to help support the amazing work that Leo Grillo is doing there. And while you're there, click on that estate planning tab. And if you have an old 401k, an IRA, a stock that you want to get rid of, you might get some kind of tax benefit now after you consult with your financial planner to help make Delta Rescue an enduring mission that can go on for generations. Go to deltarescue.org and see what you can do. You know what chaos looks like, don't you? You've got employees. If you're the person that's running a business or in charge of the finances, you probably spend most of your time running around, creating expense accounts, tracking down receipts, telling people what they can spend money on and what they can't, what the caps are. Well, I'm about to change everything for you. I want to introduce you to Ramp. This is a Ramp card. It looks just like a normal Visa card. And when you sign up for Ramp, you can get physical cards, virtual cards. It's an entire expense management system that integrates into your existing platforms right now and will save you so much time and money. It allows you to set up, whether you got 5 or 5,000 employees, systems so that you don't spend all of your day chasing down receipts. It integrates, it updates, and does things so seamless that you will be thankful when you switch over to Ramp. I switched my company over to Ramp. One of our guests did it. This is amazing. They've got a white glove onboarding system that will help you. You can set up literally in minutes and get going. Ramp is unbelievable. 25,000 businesses, including Shopify and the Boys and Girls Club of America, have started using Ramp, and that's why it's named #1 in spend management by G2. And for a limited time only right now, listeners and watchers of this show get $250 in your pocket. $250 just by joining Ramp. Go to ramp.com/Spicer, ramp.com/Spicer. Cards are issued by Sutton Bank, member FDIC. Terms and conditions apply. All right, without further ado, my colleague from the morning meeting, Dan Turrentine. Dan, good to see you.
Sean, thanks for having me. Great to see you.
Good to see you. All right, let me just ask you this right now. If you had to sort of explain to somebody, let's just say someone comes and visits you from another country and says, Dan, I know you're a top operative. You've been around the block a few times. Where does your party stand right now? How would you answer that?
Well, we're in rough shape right now. There's a couple things. I think the first is that our brand is toxic right now. If you look at all the research that the party is doing, the groups on the outside are doing, it's all consistent. Voters think that our brand is weak, that we have a trust problem. They see us as culturally disconnected, and they see us as lacking an agenda that is kind of relevant to their everyday lives. At the same time, we're somewhat leaderless. The natural people would be Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, our congressional leaders, but they're in a very unique position in that they are more moderate by political temperament. And the party right now is very left. And so they're afraid of the base, which has paralyzed them. So other than that, Sean, the play was great. But,
yes, Mrs. Lincoln.
We're in a little bit of rough shape right now.
In the past, enough times you've been able to, like, not you, but the outside party has been able to be anti the current party, right? So we, for a long time, were anti-Obama, then we were anti-Biden. And that can sometimes get you by. So you kind of have three things. One, you've got your current leadership. Two, you've got your proactive agenda, what you're fighting for. And then you can be anti the current party in power, which is Republicans. I feel like that's the third one is the only one that you guys, and even that, like, tactically, I'm not really sure that's solid.
Yeah, no, look, I agree with you. I mean, I think one of the biggest, items in the news right now is tariffs. And if you listen to our party, they're very kind of tepid. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, AOC, people that are usually the tip of the spear that Trump is terrible. Well, tariffs are not bad. When used right, they can be good. And I'm not totally against tariffs. I think part of the challenge is that while Trump is having some struggles right now, primarily because of tariffs, you don't see our brand rising kind of, inverse to him. And I think that's just partly because people look at us and still think, even with his troubles, I don't necessarily like you guys. And so we can be, we've been anti-Trump for 9 years. It hasn't really worked. And I think basically right now, what you have some people hoping is that Trump fails. But if he starts putting points on the board, then we're right back at, we're right back where we are. So it's hard.
Yeah, I want to talk about the tactics, and then we'll get into the people in the midterms in a second. But you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago on the morning meeting. There was this op-ed from one of Kamala's deputy campaign managers in the New York Times, and it said, "I work for Harris and Biden. Here's the missing link for Democrats." And I thought the thing that was fascinating is it said it more had to do with kind of the mechanics, as I like to say. And I am a big believer that mechanics matter, how and where you're communicating. And it kind of talks about not having the level of influencers and talking to the same outlets, the New York Times. And it says opt-out voters aren't watching CNN or paying for news subscriptions, but they still get a lot of information from social media, friends and family. Politics for them tends to show up as cultural drift, bits of stories, values, secondhand outrage shared online. A young dad scrolling Instagram for parenting tips stumbles across a clip about traditional family values. So is the mechanical piece, I guess, is that the easiest one to fix maybe, which is, and whose job is that? Like, is that the DNC that needs to lead that effort? Is it one of the current elected officials? Like, who leads that challenge?
Well, traditionally, both the Senate and the House within their leadership structures have people whose job is to be in charge of communications. And, they should be the ones. When I worked for Jared Polis as his chief of staff, we used to host meetings to show people how to use the Facebook and how to do stuff. But I think part of it is, Sean, you and I know this. You can go on a podcast, right? But if you're stiff and reading the talking points and kind of going on there like you're, talking to CNN in a 30-second clip, you're going to fail. So I think part of it is going to where these people are, going on podcasts, using social media more. But part of it is and this is one of Trump's geniuses, right? He can sit in the boardroom, he can sit in the Oval Office, or he can sit with just pretty much anybody and shoot the breeze, right? And he'll get his messages in, he'll figure out, but he'll also, you want to talk sports? We'll talk sports. You want to talk pop culture? He'll talk pop culture. And so as an audience, you relax because you're like, okay, this guy or woman in some instances is like one of us. They're connecting with us. They have interest. And that's where, as a party, we still kind of are like, tie on, collar tight, in our straitjackets, like uncomfortable in that medium. And so I think, the party needs to do a good job of reaching out. And then the people who go on need to understand this is the environment you're in.
Yeah, it's funny though, because I remember when Trump went to that McDonald's during the campaign, and he was still dressed like he put a apron on, but he still had like a coat and tie. And if any other politician had done that, they would have been mocked. Like, he doesn't even look like he's training, but Trump gets away with things that nobody else could. And it's amazing to me because you've got this billionaire guy talking about the plight of working men and women who shows up in a coat and tie everywhere, but still is seen as relatable.
He's authentic, but he always dresses that way, right? I mean, if you see him on the patio of Mar-a-Lago, maybe the tie is off, but it is his brand. No, but I'm serious. He's always dressed kind of looking like a leader. He looks like an executive. He looks like somebody who means business, right? Okay, when he goes to play golf, he obviously wears that attire. But because Trump's authentic, because that's who he is, as you say, he gets away with it. Where people get in trouble is when it's like, okay, I'm at a McDonald's, let me go put on a work shirt. I'm over here, and it's like, do I own a work shirt? Somebody go to Target and buy me one, right?
Well, so I want to stay on the mechanics for a second because Senate Democrats had this retreat. Ezra Klein was one of the speakers. And then there's this guy, David Shore, who talked to them. And it was interesting because Shore had briefed Democrats. I don't know if you've been familiar with this. He's got some kind of presentation that he's going around.
Working class project. Yep.
Right. And this gets back to the mechanics, right? Where Ezra Klein is talking a lot about this, that there needs to be more outreach. And I guess this gets back to the who, right? Is the DNC partially on the hook to help these guys do the outreach to these groups, to give them lists of I guess the question I'm trying to ask you is, like, everybody's got a bunch of ideas, but someone's got to implement them, right? And so before I get into the personalities, if you will, like, who's stepping up to say, I got it. We will lead this effort. Because when I was at the RNC, we led that effort. I mean, everybody was bought into it, by the way, and we didn't say we will do it for you. We just said we'll help build the tools and then you guys use them. So we're not trying to tell you what to do or how to do it, but we're going to help you with the mechanics.
Yeah, I mean, it is a great question. Normally, it would be the DNC, and as you know, you'd work with the DCCC and the DSCC to steer people. I think part of the problem is a lot of senators look at Chuck Schumer and think he's a dinosaur. It used to be, it used to be that it was a point of pride for Schumer that he still uses a flip phone, right? He doesn't use an iPhone. He didn't use a BlackBerry. He was an old school flip phone guy. Now that is like, it is the quintessential example of why he is kind of outdated. Hakeem Jeffries is a little more nimble, but now we have a DNC chair who, is dealing with David Ho, kind of threatening to primary people, not necessarily putting the infrastructure together. And so I think you kind of have every man and woman for themselves right now, which you saw at like the State of the Union address where Jeffries was like, hey, don't stand up. And now Green was like, okay, great, I'm going to go do it. And so, I think it is part of the problem, Sean. An organization follows its leaders, right? They set the tone. They kind of tell you where to march. And right now, we are truly leaderless.
But don't you think, like, I remember back in the day, like, your background, you've got, aside from being a chief of staff on the Hill or whatever, you also have a huge and successful background in Democratic fundraising, right? Yep. And I remember when we were at the RNC, kind of, you got to have the whole thing together. So we had to go to donors and say, you need to invest in this because we have a plan to lead you out of the wilderness, right? And part of what we sold them on was the mechanics. We're not going to tell everyone what to say. That's not our role, blah, 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 blah. We're not picking candidates, but we need to give and equip them with the tools. And so the question is, as a fundraiser, as a guy, it's not, you don't just call people and say, can I have your money? It's, we're trying to do X. We need this much money. Can you do this? So if you put your old hat back on and Ken Martin, the DNC chairman, calls you and says, Dan, I gotta raise a ton of money. What's the plan that you could give him to say, Ken, it's not you don't just need money. You need to go to donors with a plan. And I think you could sell them on X.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. When I worked for Terry McAuliffe in 2003, 2004, we were in the minority and people were angry. It was coming off of 2002, or when the party underperformed in those midterms. I think, look, as you say, number one, you're going to raise money. Number two, within our party, traditionally, the ground game is something that they've hung their hat on as we invest in state parties. We invest in kind of cleaning up the list in data analytics. There's a lot of questions after 2024 about how effective that was as reports, kind of drip and dribble out about how much the party underperformed, about how, a lot of the voters they contacted either didn't turn out or didn't turn out for Kamala Harris. And then the third part, as you say, is updating the communications infrastructure. And I think, look, the party can't invest in podcasters, obviously, and that's a business interest, right? As you know, you have to build an audience, you have to get, advertisers. That is not an easy proposition. We have struggled on that. We struggled with talk radio. Remember Air America, this like great, we were going to compete with Rush Limbaugh, and that didn't last. And so I think what you can do is say, look, here is a spectrum of people. Here is the next up and coming Sean Spicer. You should go on this podcast, right? It might not be Josh Shapiro, but if you're a young member of Congress and that up and coming person's got, 5,000 people listening, they would love a member of Congress who's going to come on. So the party can kind of offer that. It can offer here's how you can build your profile on X, on Instagram, on Snapchat, on TikTok. Here's how you do this. That is very helpful. I think then it goes to what are you saying and who are the people?
Right. So I mean, to your point, we built a surrogate booking operation, right? And a database so that people could call the RNC and say, I need a guest. And we would say, great, we got 5 people for you, or we need someone at an event, or we need, and that was the thing, is that we made ourselves a resource for the party and for growing it, because, it's easy if you, as from a booking standpoint, if you are running a podcast, if you got one-stop shopping, you can call the RNC or the DNC and say, hey, I need 2 guests for next Friday. And they go, great. I got these 3 that you can choose from, these 5 that you can choose from, or a member of Congress or a senator or whatever. Awesome. And the more they can do that, I think they make themselves more valuable. And by the way, we can steer the right people to you, because there are some people that they probably want more than others. I do want to shift a little to the people. And you and I have talked about this in the past, so I'm going to start at the top of the ticket. Joe Biden in the last several weeks has been trying to, I don't know what, go back out there. And I guess the question is, in your opinion, not only why, but what's the reaction to Biden trying to reemerge? He's trying to sell himself after the election as a tool to the DNC. We can help you raise money. No one seemed to take him up on that. But why? What is the reaction people in the Democratic Party seeing him go out there, and why do you think he's doing it?
Well, the reaction is rough. I mean, I think people really wish he would not do this, because look, what would we like to be talking about? Tariffs and areas where we have something to say, or where Trump is struggling a little bit. Right now, because he's out there doing this, every Democrat is being asked, do you agree that Joe Biden was mentally capable and was not too old? Because Joe Biden says that he was perfectly sharp, and Joe Biden says he would have won. Do you agree with that? Right. So now we're looking backwards, and I think almost every Democrat knows he was too old. Every Democrat knows he was declining mentally. So even people like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have hamida in interviews, because they don't want to kick the guy, right? They don't want to come out and say the obvious, but they also know that if they flat out say there was nothing to see here, they look like fools. At the same time, Joe Biden is essentially trying to relitigate his presidency. He is, every interview, I would have won. I left Trump a great economy. I absolutely was willing to deal with immigration. It was just the other side's fault. And the world was such a better place. Look, Joe Biden's, I think, going to go to his grave on those fronts. But the reality is they weren't true. And regardless of what, I think, Sean, or you think, the voters spoke overwhelmingly in November, because Kamala Harris essentially ran as a continuation of Biden. Right. And so now the party is having to defend and look at his record, instead of talking either about the current record of our current president, or who are our leaders? The conversations we just had. How are we going to get out of the ditch? What messages are we going to have? And so I think, offline, there's a lot of WTFs and, vomit emojis popping up on my phone. But at the same time, in public, they're all uncomfortable and just kind of like, yeah, no, let's not talk about this.
I'm not a big fan of hypotheticals because I think they're some degree silly. But if I want to ask it to somebody like you who actually can answer this intelligently. But Biden brought up in the View interview that he gave her plenty of time. It was 6 months. That's actually not true. He dropped out in July, so she didn't have 6 months. She had at best 4 and change. But do you think that had he dropped out, let's just say at the beginning of the year, there had been a primary, would that have, do you think, significantly altered the political landscape?
Yes, I do. And I think it's two reasons. One, Kamala Harris was a terrible candidate. She was a terrible candidate in 2020. It was the same, or 2019. She didn't make it to 2020. Why? Extremely cautious, indecisive, and she plays not to lose, right? We saw this. She was, now it's coming out that they polled and focus grouped ad nauseum on the transgender attack, couldn't come to an agreement, and decided to do nothing about it, right? I mean, it's a classic Kamala Harris. Had there been a primary, I believe the laws of political physics would have occurred to her again. And she would have had to, show her stuff, prove to the party that you are worthy of the nomination. Maybe she would have, but I think it's more likely than not, it would have been contested. You would have had, probably a Bernie Sanders or an AOC or Elizabeth Warren. The progressive wing would have had its, candidate or 5. And we would have had a moderate or 2 that would have run. I think, Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, some others were certainly thinking about it. Gavin Newsom, I'm not sure which camp he's in these days. And then you would have had Kamala Harris, right? And so I think, one, the best man or woman would have emerged. 2, had it not been Harris, and I don't think it would have been, the biggest albatross around her neck, personified by that View interview, was she had no way to differentiate herself from Joe Biden. And so Trump was able to say, Joe Biden, inflation, the border, overseas is a mess, crime and safety, college campuses. If you don't like that, vote for me. And by and large, you liked my first term. It was an uphill battle, so to speak. I think a different candidate could have said, look, I didn't like, your first term, and I didn't like this, here's what I would have done differently from Joe Biden. And at least it would have given us better odds.
I also think, just to be blunt, I agree with your assessment there, by the way. But I do think the thing that I found so funny about Kamala's answer in terms of carrying the Biden, they're 2 different people, right? So even a husband and a wife, it said, hey, would you have run this differently? Like, my wife and I have different styles, okay? Like, in terms of how we handle things. And I don't think it's an insult to say, gosh, if I had managed the baseball team, if I had run the Boy Scout troop, I would have done the following different. That's not a hit against someone. And she couldn't even just say, look, I'm from a different era. I'm from California. I have this background. And so I would do things different. I don't find it, if like JD Vance got asked, how different will you be than Trump? I think he can say, well, look, I'm younger. I have a military background. He can differentiate himself without insulting Donald Trump. And that, I always found that fascinating with her, that she got asked on The View, if you recall, like, what difference would you, name something different? She goes, I can't think of anything. Yeah. And to me, that just showed such a lack of political dexterity. The idea that you can't say, well, obviously I'm a woman. I'm from California. I have a background in law. I can do it. And that's what I always found fascinating, is that, like, as a Trump supporting Republican, I could do what she should have done better. And that leads me to her, Dan. Yeah. So she's next on the list. And I feel like everybody wants to know if she's going to run for governor, if she's going to run for president again. And I got to be honest with you, I'm kind of intrigued by why anyone cares. Based on the 2019 run and on this run, I'd be like, good, if she runs. Like, why is it any Democrat? First of all, do you think she's going to run? And if so, for which office? And then secondly, why does anyone, considering her lack of political prowess, care? Yeah,
I don't think she's going to run for any office. And the reason I think that will happen is she's so cautious that I think she is so afraid of losing again, because I think if she ran for governor, it would not be a slam dunk at all.
I agree.
She win the primary, or out there, it's a jungle primary. I think she's, Al Gore in 2001 was the early favorite. John Kerry briefly after '04 was the kind of, for the first couple months was up there with Hillary Clinton. Barack Obama was way, way down. I think right now it's just name ID. But, Sean, to your point, everybody knew if the moment Biden got out, the number one question was going to be, how are you different than Joe Biden? He was unpopular, right, at the time. If you go back to 2019, what got her tangled up? Medicare for all. It was the hot topic in our primary in the fall of 2019. Everybody knew at that second debate that was going to be topic numero uno. Warren and Sanders were going at each other on that. And yet she was totally unprepared to answer it, fumbled all over the place, and then to make it worse, spent a week trying to clean it up and just made it worse because she refused to take a position. Right? Sound familiar?
You know what though? When you were saying this, I was thinking back to 2012. Romney had run in 2008. He was obviously questioned about his wealth and all the stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, you've had 4 years between your runs and you knew some of the things that were issues for you. So you go clean them up. That's just obvious. And frankly, it doesn't, I mean, if you were playing a game of pickup basketball and you realized that that everybody was scoring because they were running down the right and laying the ball up, right? It was just an easy shot. You go, hey guys, let's get the guard to guard on that side because that's where our weak spot was. It's not even politics, it's just anything, common sense. You go, hey, this is what worked well for us last time. This is what didn't work well. So when Romney comes out in 12, I'm thinking, okay, if this guy's smart, right? He set up a foundation in Africa. He's gotten his taxes. And I remember them being like, oh God, he's going to get asked about his taxes. And I'm like, okay, so what's the answer? Like, well, we don't know yet. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? You've had 4 years to think of this and it's the number one thing. How can you not, like, it wasn't like it happened yesterday. And it's the same thing with Harris, to your point. Like, How did you not think this was going to be the obvious question? When I was White House press secretary, people ask me all the time, like, how did you prepare for briefings? And I'm like, the first 80% of the questions are obvious. It's just read the headlines, read what's trending on Twitter, see what this being talked about on talk radio and talk, the morning. And the other 20, you war game, but you can get the first 80. And I felt like with Harris, I'm like, and then, likewise with Romney, it's like, dude, you knew this was coming.
Yeah. And I think, part of the problem again is she often, I think it was pretty apparent, and you called this out, during the fall. She went into those interviews, I think, trying not to make news. And that was a problem because I think, and I know, in early August, Harris felt like the rocket took off. She leapt in front of Trump, a couple points, 2-3 points, but they thought, okay, we've got a lead. She thought, let's just ride it home.
Yeah.
And coming out of her
prevent defense. It was prevent defense.
That was it. And so, Trump kind of steadied himself, got right back, on his horse. And by mid-September, he had a small but durable lead that he never gave up. But yet she kept going into interviews in October when she knew she was down, just like, don't make news, don't make a mistake, don't do anything. So, it goes to your question of her future. Democrats in the party do not fear her. I don't know a single Democrat that says, I won't run for president if she does. And I think if she runs for governor, there are some that have said publicly, we will not run. But I know at least one member of Congress from California who has, I've heard said, I won't say how, I'm still going to run because he thinks she has a glass jaw.
Yeah, I'm with you on this. The problem I can't get my head around is that for someone like her that's done nothing but be in government for a long time, I don't know if they know what to do.
Great point.
And that's the problem with her. Al Gore at least was found, I mean, he ran and lost, but like he found a cause and he's done fine. And I think that like, because of the outcome of that election, like he still has, he's somewhat revered in Democratic politics. I'll leave you to agree with me or not, but I don't think, I just wonder, or does Doug Emhoff make enough money that it doesn't matter? Maybe that's enough of a case, but but I'm with you. I think she defers on both. Yeah. And who knows, she's young enough that maybe she's trying, but I think inherently every time I see her do an interview, I go, okay, you remind me why people were turned off from you, which brings us to number 3 on the list, Timmy. He was at Harvard. I want to just remind people what he said to the crowd, although I did talk about it. So let me play you why he says he was chosen on the ticket. Let's go.
I knew I was on the ticket I would argue because we did a lot of amazing progressive things in Minnesota that improved people's lives. But I also was on the ticket, quite honestly, because I could code talk to white guys watching football, fixing their truck, doing that I could put them at ease. I was the permission structure to say, look, you can do this and vote for this. And you look across those swing states, with the exception of Minnesota, we didn't get enough.
Dan, I want to have my Lloyd Benson moment here right now. I am a white guy. I do watch football, and I do drive a truck, although I don't. You are no code talker, Tim Walz. I feel like the idea that to me was so tone deaf. The idea of saying I'm a code talker to white guys. I mean, dude, this guy, I don't know how he got elected twice before statewide. Maybe sometimes niche in terms of the congressional district that he, but you can't tell me that anybody in the Democratic Party thinks that he's got a future, right?
No, and I think, it's so fascinating because Walz came out of the election not in good shape, right? And I think in his telling, he was muzzled, right? He like right after the election in January, he started doing interviews saying like, I don't know why they didn't let me do more interviews. Like, they basically had him going around to raise money and kind of do stuff off the beaten path. So he clearly decided that the way he was going to kind of remain relevant, he wants to run for president, is that he would go out and do all these interviews, just like he did in that summer and spring of 24 when he kind of got hot at the right moment. But I think, Sean, go back to the campaign when he was asked about his biography, and there's more than one mistake in there. And he just kind of was like on the knucklehead, right? It was so kind of childish and amateurish that, J.D. Vance, it was one of the great TKOs in political history. But when he makes statements like that, you just think you're an amateur. Like you look goofy. You look kind of like, you don't belong in a suit sitting at Harvard talking about politics. You're just kind of like immature, and you say the things out loud that you probably shouldn't say. And I just think he hurts himself. And of course, he went on there to defend DEI like it was the hill to die on, with the ultimate irony that 24 hours later, Harvard announced they were ending their DEI office. So even Harvard was getting rid of DEI, and Tim Walz was like, we are charging that hill.
I didn't even think about that. That's so brilliant. I literally, it's like, dude, you came here and you made us worse. All right, so let's get into it. I'll just go down some of the folks because I do wonder if that's the case, right? You think about the top three. No one ever thought Biden was going to run again, but I had to start with him. I think Harris, I'm with you on. Tim Walz, I'm with you on. So let's just start. Your old boss, Jared Polis, governor of Colorado. Is he somebody that's got these kind of ambitions? And if so, what's his lane?
He definitely has the ambition. I mean, Jared is young. He's made a ton of money. His family had money as well. So I think, what does one do next when they've been a successful politician? He is interesting because I think he's going to try to run in what is going to be really for the first time in a long time, a libertarian wing of the Democratic Party. He's very pro-business. He's very pro-capital markets. But by the same token, he, like his state, is very much a kind of social libertarian. Leave us alone. He's been for marijuana, for legalizing gay marriage. He is gay, for those who don't know that. And so I think the progressives like him because he's been their champion for years on stuff before it was cool. And the business community has historically been pretty good with him. The question is, are there enough of those voters to win a primary in our party? It's hard, but maybe.
All right. So what about another governor, J.B. Pritzker, Illinois governor, made his state a sanctuary state? Is he playing in the progress? I mean, the guy's got a boatload of cash. So I mean, that's the big X factor where you can just write the check. That takes the Dan Turrentine professional fundraising question off the table. So does J.B. Pritzker? I got to be honest with you. I know this sounds but appearance matters. This does not look like a guy who is gearing up to run for president.
Yeah, and look, full disclosure for your viewers, my brother-in-law's wife works for him. But I have not had too many chats recently with her about this. But look, he is clearly trying to fill that progressive lane. For those who don't know, his State of the State speech, he spent about a third of it talking about how this basically comparing Trump to Hitler. He then, comes out and says basically that we have to be, protest as much as humanly possible, be disruptive, do everything we can to stop him. He is truly trying to kind of muscle AOC, into that wing, kind of the most red hot progressive in the party. I think part of the strategy is you can't win the general, obviously, without winning the primary. So He thinks, okay, this is a path. And then, as you say, his family founded Hyatt Hotels. He is, he was born on, I forget, third base. He was born an inch from home with a couple $1 billion in his pocket. And he's very, sophisticated in business. And I think he believes if I get the nomination, look, I'm a Pritzker. I'm wealthy. I have interests all over the country. The business community won't be threatened. I don't know how he thinks you can get away with that in this day and age where, it's really hard to make that. 40 years ago, you could kind of pivot to the middle than the general. I also just think the history of being the most progressive in our party does not usually win the primary. And that, to me, I just don't really understand what he's doing.
All right. So let's move a little in the same area there. Governor Gretchen Whitmer. What about her?
Yeah, you, Mark, and I have kind of gone back and forth on this. I think she's impressive. And I think her working with Trump, I am going to assume that Trump will be at worst where he is now, if not slightly better in 3 years, right? He's such a good political athlete. I just can't see him collapsing. So working with Trump, I think is going to give her the opportunity to fill that moderate lane with, like, I put some points on the board. I've worked with this guy when I need to, and I've stood my ground when I need to. I know she had some photo ops that don't look good, but I don't think anyone will remember that 3 years from now.
All right. We're in the governor world here. Andy Beshear of Kentucky. I don't think he's been making it clear. I'm in this. I don't know. I mean, he's young. He's won what is perceived to be a red state, even though I think that's not entirely accurate in terms of. But what are his prospects, and who does he appeal to?
Yeah, he's he's an interesting guy because on paper he looks amazing. I think he actually has been one of the best spokespeople on the tariff issue, talking about companies in his state, and he's had McConnell and Rand Paul kind of saying the same thing, which is hard to have a governor of one party and senators from the other all sing from the same hymnal. But boy, he is milquetoast. Like, he is not going to light a room on fire. You and I laughed at his one podcast that he's, started here because it was so like lights, camera, action. It sounded almost like an SNL spoof of like him.
Right. What you're supposed to look like.
Yeah. And so I think if the voters say, I want somebody, and I'm not being snarky here, that's kind of dull and not exciting, right? Maybe like the opposite of Trump a little bit. Maybe he is that person. But otherwise, I just don't see him walking into a state and lighting it on fire.
All right, Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania. Everybody thought he should have been the pick last time for VP. Obviously, he held out. Does he have what lane does he fill? And is he someone that you're high on?
Yeah, I'm very high on him. I would put him at the top of that moderate lane. And I think that, Whitmer, we kind of laugh about that she's had some cringe moments. Beshear is kind of milquetoast. Shapiro's the whole package. And I think, to his credit, when he got tagged during the primary vetting as being too in support of Israel, you have two options when that happens. You can either kind of try to wiggle out of it a little to say, oh, I'm sympathetic with the Palestinians, and kind of try to have it both ways. Or you can just say, yep, that's who I am. And I think he's going to be rewarded that he did not and has not to date changed positions to appease the left. And that in our party historically has actually proven pretty successful.
Okay. So the last governor that I think I want to hit is Gavin Newsom. I feel like he's so slick. I don't know. I'm not a Democrat, so I don't think that it's odd that he doesn't appeal to me at all. But I think he tries too hard.
We lost the popular vote, and we lost the electoral vote. We got crushed. And we need to be humble about that, and we need to have some grace, and we need to understand why. Was it because of the incumbency penalty? Was it because of inflation? Was it because of interest rates? Was it because of immigration? Was it because we were too, quote unquote, woke? Was it because of issues with Israel? Was it all of the above? I think we are going through that forensic. We need to understand at the same time, we also have to push back against the whitewaters and headwinds of the Trump administration.
And I don't know where does he fit within this structure?
So Mark and I have gone back and forth on this. I'm not as high on Gavin Newsom because to me, the problem that he's going to have is the state of California. And I know that everyone can, he is very good at all the statistics of why California's economy is pretty strong. And I just think the problem he's going to have is what Kamala Harris had, which is most people's first thought of California these days is businesses fleeing, residents fleeing, the homelessness problem, San Francisco kind of in decay, Los Angeles. I don't think he really helped himself with those wildfires. Again, he might have done a great job, but some of those early images of him running from reporters, running from constituents, trying to track him down, I just don't see how he can kind of come out and say, I'm a moderate, which is what he's trying to do now with all these solutions, when the Republicans are just going to say, look at your own state. Like, I think J.B. Pritzker's going to have the same problem. I mean, Chicago's a war zone.
Am I missing, before I get to the congressional potentials, is there anyone else on the governor's scene or outside of Washington, if you will, that I'm missing on that list?
You hear people say Mark Cuban may run. I just don't see it.
No.
I think, somebody will flirt and say they're our Trump. I think there's only one Trump, and as you know.
What about Stephen A. Smith? I know people like to throw that out there. But I'm with you. I think that Trump is, I've said this before, a unicorn, right? Yeah. The idea, I think Stephen A. Smith speaks, has a great audience because he's speaking common sense. But I don't think that people like that understand the game of politics, how to raise money, how to play the game with data and calendar. But that's to me, and frankly, if you got the contract that guy does with ESPN, I don't see you giving it up. All right, so let's move to the Hill. I think the sort of, let's start with the oldies, and I mean, does Bernie Sanders try again? I mean, he's at the point where I got to be honest with you, he doesn't necessarily look it. I think he still has energy. Even Trump said that the other day. But does Bernie Sanders give it one more try?
I thought no way, but I will be very curious, Sean, coming off this, oligarchs tour, where his head is. Like, you and I laugh, but they were getting, as you know, it's hard to get that many people to show up state after state. Like, I don't care where you are. How can it not go to his head? How can he not say, I still got it, right? And I think, I think he'd be way too old. I think, I can give you a million reasons. I think he has not ruled it out. That would be, I think when you're that close to getting the nomination twice, you have to ask yourself, is third time the charm?
I get it, but at some point you go, do I really want to be doing this when I'm 80, waking up every morning? I mean, I honestly, there's a point at which I'm glad Trump ruled it out the other day, because at some point I'm like, I don't know that I at some point enjoy life a little, and I appreciate everything he's done. What about Elizabeth Warren? I got to believe that she thinks that this is her chance.
Yeah, it's funny, Sean. I've heard from people around her she's not, which I
really
remarkable that she is not thinking to do it. And I don't know why. I don't, she's getting up there. So you would think, okay, she wants to become, Teddy Kennedy and be in there for 30 years and do all these things. I don't know, but that's what I've heard. She's not thinking about it right now. Like she's seriously thinking not to do it, that she's going the opposite direction.
All right. So the buzz is,
sorry to disappoint you, by the way.
No. I mean, I'm kind of glad in the sense that I don't ever want to have to think that it might happen. AOC is one that I think gets a lot of attention online. I do think there's a big difference between being a representative of a safe district and running either statewide or obviously nationally. And you have to give up everything when you're a member of Congress. It's not like it's in the middle of your term and you can get a free shot. Is she a serious candidate in your mind in the Democratic Party?
She is, for two reasons. Look, I will just say this. Her politics aren't necessarily mine, but I have tremendous admiration for her as a political athlete. She is nimble. She is aggressive. She understands social media, and she is unafraid of the right. She's unafraid of, if you and I think about who's ready to get into the ring, throw punches, and knows exactly what's coming at them, she's one of the people who I think gets it. So I think, again, like Sanders, how can you not, if you're her, having done this tour, let's say he doesn't run. He's certainly not going to be against you. Maybe he endorses you, but I doubt it. but you're the natural heir. And the question then becomes, when do you go? And if you look at the last 20 years, the history of waiting, John Edwards passing, Hillary Clinton thought about 04 and passed. The longer you wait, the more something could happen. And I think she will, I actually think she may jump in. She would be a serious candidate, as much as that kind of pains me a little bit, but she'd be serious.
Yeah, I don't disagree that she could raise the money because she's a force when it comes to that. She would definitely get a lot of media attention. And I don't know. I just wonder, I mean, does that mean that she doesn't take a shot at Chuck Schumer?
Well, that's an interesting question, right? Because for those who don't know, at least as of today, she leads Schumer by about 20 points in the polls in New York in a primary. And of course, the challenge for Schumer, therefore, is you have to take her down. And that carries risk of going to war with your own base.
Yeah.
So I don't. It's a great question, Sean. She's got options, and they're good options for her.
If you had to bet Mark Halperin's money, would you bet that she runs for Chuck Schumer's seat or makes a run at the presidency?
Schumer's seat, and then she gets ready to run for the presidency.
See, I'm with you on that. I exactly agree with that. Why not buy yourself a Senate seat, become the statewide hero, raise even more money? I mean, she's so young that but if you lose that presidential race as a member of Congress, you're done.
Yeah.
And right, because then you don't have where do you go? Whereas you can take out Schumer, and now you've got a runway where you can run in an off cycle and take free shots at running for president, as long as you weren't in cycle. Dan Turrentine, I always appreciate it when you come on. Obviously, we start the morning every day together, which is great. And then, but this is a deep dive that I've been looking forward to having for a while. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
John, thank you as always for having me on. Love it.
Okay. Guys, remember, always sign up for the newsletter at SeanSpicer.com. It comes out twice a week. It's free. VIP membership is always appreciated to get by. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.